In the ancient Cherokee lands, there lived a woman so proud that when the great wolf spirit offered her the most sacred gift in all creation, she laughed in his face. What happened next would change not just her life, but the fate of her entire tribe forever. Her name was Aiyana, which meant eternal blossom in the old tongue. But unlike the gentle flower her name suggested, Aiyana had grown into something far more fierce and untouchable. At 25 winters, she stood as the most beautiful woman in the village of Kenuna. Nestled deep in the misty mountains where the ancient spirits still walked among mortals, Aiyana's beauty was legendary. Her long, raven black hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall in moonlight. Her eyes, dark as the deepest forest pools, could make even the bravest warriors stumble over their words. Her skin, smooth as river stones, seemed to glow with an inner light that made others whisper she surely had spirit blood running through her veins. But it was precisely this beauty that had become Aiyana's curse, though she would never admit it. Every compliment, every admiring glance, every gift brought to her doorstep had fed her pride until it grew as towering as the sacred mountains themselves. She believed herself above the simple ways of her people, above their ancient traditions, and certainly above their old stories of spirits and magic. Grandmother tales. She would scoff whenever the elders spoke of the animal spirits that guided their ancestors. Superstitions for simple minds. The village chief, Old Running Bear, often shook his head when he watched Aiyana stride through the village square, her chin held high, her eyes looking past the people who had raised and loved her. Pride, he would mutter to his wife, pride walks before the fall. And that young woman had forgotten the most important teaching of our people. What teaching is that, my husband? His wife would ask, though she already knew the answer. That we are not separate from the spirits, but part of them. The moment we believe ourselves above the sacred connection, we lose everything that makes us Cherokee. But Aiyana paid no attention to such wisdom. She had her own plans, her own dreams that reached far beyond the confines of village life. She dreamed of the great cities she had heard traders speak of, places where a woman of her beauty could live like a queen. She dreamed of riches and admiration from people who truly mattered, not these simple mountain folk with their endless rituals and boring traditions. It was on the night of the harvest moon, when the veil between worlds grows thin, and the spirits walk freely among the living, that everything changed. The celebration had lasted well into the night. The entire village had gathered in the great circle, sharing food, stories, and songs that had been passed down for generations. Children ran between the adults, their laughter mixing with the crackling of the sacred fire. The elders told the old stories, their weathered voices carrying the weight of centuries. But Aiyana sat apart from it all, her arms crossed, her expression one of barely concealed boredom. When her childhood friend Sequoia approached and asked to dance, she waved him away dismissively. I have better things to do than spin around a fire like some primitive savage, she said, her words cutting through the warm night air like a cold blade. Sequoia's face fell. He had known Aiyana since they were children, had watched her grow from a sweet, laughing girl into this cold, distant woman. Aiyana, he said softly, these are our people. This is our way. Don't you remember how you used to love the harvest celebration? That was before I grew up, she replied sharply. Before I realized there was a whole world beyond this little village and its silly superstitions. As the night grew deeper and the celebration began to wind down, Aiyana finally rose from her spot and walked toward her family's lodge. She was tired of the festivities, tired of the looks of disappointment from the elders, tired of feeling trapped in a life that felt too small for someone of her magnificence. The path to her lodge wound through a grove of ancient oak trees, their massive trunks standing like silent sentinels in the moonlight. It was here, in the sacred place where generations of Cherokee had walked before her, that the impossible happened 81st. It was just a shadow moving between the trees, then a soft padding of feet on fallen leaves. Aiyana stopped walking, her heart suddenly racing for reasons she couldn't understand. The night had grown strangely quiet, as if every cricket and night bird had suddenly decided to hold its breath. And then she saw him. The wolf stepped out from behind the largest oak tree, and Aiyana knew immediately that this was no ordinary animal. He was massive, larger than any wolf she had ever seen, with fur that seemed to shimmer between silver and white in the moonlight. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch in her throat. They were ancient, wise, and filled with a depth of knowledge that seemed to span centuries. Most people would have been terrified. Most people would have dropped to their knees in recognition of the sacred presence before them. But Aiyana, in her pride and disbelief, simply stared. The great wolf spirit spoke, and his voice was like thunder rolling across distant mountains, like wind through ancient forests, like the whisper of time itself. Aiyana, daughter of the Cherokee, I have watched you from the spirit realm. I have seen your beauty, but more importantly, I have seen your potential. Tonight, I offer you the greatest gift that can be bestowed upon a mortal soul. The wolf stepped closer, and as he did, the air around him began to shimmer with otherworldly energy. Fireflies appeared from nowhere, dancing around him in patterns that spoke of magic older than memory. I offer you the gift of true sight, the wolf continued, his massive head tilting slightly as he studied her reaction. With this gift, you will see beyond the physical world into the realm of spirits. You will understand the connections that bind all living things. You will have the power to heal not just bodies, but souls. You will become a bridge between the world of mortals and the world of spirits, a sacred responsibility that few are chosen to bear. The wolf paused, his ancient eyes never leaving her face. But know this, daughter of the mountains, this gift comes with great responsibility. You must use it to serve your people, to protect the balance between worlds, to remember always that you are part of something far greater than yourself. For a moment, just a moment, Aiyana felt something stir deep within her heart. She felt the pull of something ancient and powerful, a calling that seemed to resonate in her very bones. The rational part of her mind recognized that she was witnessing something extraordinary, something that perhaps only a handful of people in all of history had ever experienced. But then her pride reasserted itself, rising up like a wall between her heart and her mind. She looked at this magnificent creature, this being that legends were made of, and she laughed. It was not a joyful laugh, not the sound of delight or wonder. It was a cold, mocking laugh that seemed to slice through the sacred silence of the grove like a knife. A talking wolf, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. How original. I suppose next you'll be telling me that if I follow you, I'll find a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. The wolf's expression did not change, but something shifted in the air around them. The fireflies stopped their dancing and hung motionless, as if the very forest was holding its breath. You think this is some kind of trick? Aiyana continued, emboldened by what she mistook for the wolf's silence. Some elaborate joke played by the village children? Or perhaps one of the elders trying to teach me a lesson about respecting the old ways? She stepped closer to the wolf, her eyes flashing with contempt. I am not some simple village girl who believes in fairy tales and magic. I am destined for greater things than playing along with these ridiculous superstitions. Take your sacred gift and offer it to someone gullible enough to believe in such nonsense. The wolf studied her for a long moment, and in his ancient eyes, she might have seen sadness if she had been looking. Instead, she saw only what her pride allowed her to see, proof of her own superiority over these backward beliefs. You refuse my gift? The wolf asked, his voice now carrying an undertone that made the very trees seem to lean away. I refuse your delusions, Aiyana said firmly. I choose reality over fantasy, progress over primitive superstition. Find someone else to play your games with. With that, she turned her back on the great wolf spirit and began walking toward her lodge, her head held high, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. She had shown that she was too intelligent, too sophisticated to be taken in by such obvious trickery. Behind her, the wolf spoke one final time, and his words seemed to echo from every tree, every stone, every blade of grass in the grove. Pride goeth before destruction, daughter of the Cherokee, and you have chosen destruction over blessing. What you have refused in your arrogance, you will beg for in your desperation. But begging will not be enough. Only true sacrifice can undo the choice you have made this night. Aiyana didn't stop walking. She didn't even look back. She simply waved her hand dismissively over her shoulder, as if shooing away an annoying insect. More riddles and mystical nonsense, she muttered. I expected better special effects for such an elaborate performance. But as she reached her lodge and pushed aside the deer hide that covered the entrance, she noticed something strange. The night had grown colder. much colder than it should have been for the season. And somewhere in the distance, she could have sworn she heard the sound of a wolf howling, a sound so mournful and so full of ancient sorrow that it made her shiver despite herself. She shook off the feeling and settled down on her sleeping furs. Probably just some ordinary wolf, she told herself firmly. All this talk of spirits and magic is just making me imagine things. But sleep was slow in coming that night, and when it finally did, her dreams were filled with silver-white fur and ancient, knowing eyes that seemed to look straight through to her soul. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came 3 days later. Aiyana woke to find frost covering the ground outside her lodge, despite the fact that autumn had barely begun. The other villagers gathered in worried clusters, pointing at the unseasonable cold and whispering among themselves. "It's not natural," old Running Bear said, his breath visible in the frigid air. "I have lived through 70 winters, and I have never seen frost come so early or so fierce." The tribal medicine woman, an ancient crone named Sasa, whose eyes were clouded with age but whose inner sight remained sharp, felt the air with gnarled fingers and shook her head grimly. "This is no ordinary weather," she announced to the gathering crowd. "This cold carries the weight of spiritual displeasure. Someone among us has offended the spirits." All eyes turned toward Aiyana, who stood apart from the group, her arms wrapped around herself against the biting wind that had sprung up from nowhere. "Why are you all looking at me?" she demanded, though something in her stomach had begun to twist with unease. Sasa approached her slowly, her milky eyes somehow still managing to peer directly into Aiyana's soul. "Child," she said softly, "what happened on the night of the harvest moon? What did you see in the sacred grove?" "Nothing," Aiyana said quickly, too quickly. "I saw nothing but trees and shadows." But even as she spoke the words, the wind grew stronger, and the temperature dropped another several degrees. Ice began forming on the surface of the village well, and the children ran crying to their mothers as the cold bit through their clothing like wolf teeth. That night, the temperature plummeted even further. By morning, the village was encased in a layer of ice so thick that the water vessels had frozen solid, and the cook fires struggled to stay lit. Several of the elderly villagers had taken ill from the cold, and the younger children were showing signs of frostbite despite the warm clothing their mothers had wrapped around them. "This is impossible," Sequoia said as he helped distribute extra furs to the families with small children. "The leaves haven't even started to change color yet. How can we be facing the depths of winter?" But it was more than just cold. The very spirit of the village seemed to be freezing along with the air. Laughter disappeared from the children's voices. The elders stopped telling their stories. Even the dogs huddled together in miserable silence, their usual playful barking replaced by anxious whimpers. And still, the temperature continued to drop by the end of the first week. The unnatural winter had claimed its first life. Old Man Willow, who had been fighting a cough all season, succumbed to the cold in his sleep as the villagers gathered for his funeral. They could barely dig to the frozen ground to lay him to rest. It was then that Sasa made her announcement. "This curse will not lift until whoever has offended the spirits makes amends," she declared, her voice carrying over the assembled villagers like a prophecy of doom. "Someone among us has refused a sacred offering, has turned their back on the spiritual realm. Until that person acknowledges their error and seeks forgiveness, we will all suffer the consequences." Aiyana felt every eye in the village turned toward her, and for the first time since that night in the grove, real fear began to creep into her heart. But her pride was still stronger than her fear, and she lifted her chin defiantly. "You're all looking for someone to blame, because you can't accept that sometimes the weather is just the weather," she said, her voice cutting through the frozen air. "I won't be your scapegoat for natural phenomena." But even as she spoke, her hands were trembling, and not just from the cold. The second week brought death to the village's livestock. The horses, usually hardy creatures capable of surviving the harsh mountain winters, began falling one by one, their bodies simply unable to generate enough heat to survive in the supernatural cold. The cattle followed, and then the chickens and goats. The village's food stores, meant to last through a normal winter, were being depleted at an alarming rate as people burned through their supplies trying to generate enough heat to stay alive. Children who had been healthy and robust just weeks before now lay listless in their mother's arms, their lips blue with cold despite being wrapped in every fur and blanket the family owned. And still, Aiyana refused to admit what she knew in her heart to be true. Coincidence, she insisted, even as her own breath formed ice crystals in the air. A harsh early winter, nothing more. But doubt was beginning to eat away at her certainty like acid. In the quiet moments when she was alone in her lodge, wrapped in every piece of warm clothing she owned, she found herself remembering the wolf's words. What you have refused in your arrogance, you will beg for in your desperation. The third week brought the first blizzard. IT struck, without warning, a wall of white fury that seemed to come from all directions at once. The wind howled like all the wolves in creation crying out in anguish, and the snow fell so thick and fast that people couldn't see their own hands in front of their faces. The blizzard lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. When it finally stopped, the village was buried under drifts so high that the lodges were barely visible. Worse yet, 2 more elders had died in the storm, and several children were showing signs of the deep cold sickness that meant their bodies were beginning to shut down. IT was on a morning after the blizzard ended that Aiyana found herself standing in the sacred grove again. She hadn't planned to come here. She had simply been walking, trying to clear her head, trying to think of any explanation for what was happening that didn't involve admitting she had been wrong. But somehow, her feet had carried her to this place where everything had started. The grove looked different now. The ancient oaks were encased in ice, their massive branches bending under the weight of frozen crystals. The ground was covered in snow so deep that she could barely make out the path she had walked just 3 weeks ago. And there, in the center of the grove, she saw him again. The great wolf spirit stood exactly where it stood that night, as if he had been waiting for her all this time. But he looked different now. His silver-white fur seemed dimmer, and his ancient eyes held a sadness so profound that it made Aiyana's heart ache just to look at him. "I knew you would come," he said, his voice carrying easily through the frozen air. Desperation has a way of opening closed minds. Aiyana wanted to maintain her defiance, wanted to continue insisting that this was all coincidence and natural phenomenon. But standing here, looking at this magnificent being who radiated power and wisdom beyond mortal comprehension, she found that her pride was no match for the evidence of her own eyes. "You're real," she whispered, her voice small and broken in the vast silence of the grove. "I have always been real," the wolf replied gently. "It was your belief that was false." Tears began to form in Aiyana's eyes, freezing on her cheeks almost instantly. "The village, my people, they're dying because of me." "Yes," the wolf said simply. "They are." The word hit her like a physical blow. She had been responsible for all of it. The unnatural cold, the deaths of the elders, the suffering of the children, the destruction of everything her people had built and cherished. "I'm sorry," she said, dropping to her knees in the deep snow. "I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was prideful and stupid and wrong about everything. Please, I'll do anything. Just stop this curse. Let my people live." The wolf studied her for a long moment, his ancient eyes seeming to look straight through to her soul. "Your sorrow is real," he said finally. "Your remorse is genuine. But sorrow and remorse alone cannot undo what has been done. A gift refused in pride cannot be simply reoffered. The balance has been disturbed, and balance must be restored." "Tell me how," Aiyana begged, her voice breaking. "Tell me what I have to do." The wolf was quiet for so long that Aiyana began to fear he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of finality. "There is a way," he said slowly, "but the price is higher than the gift I originally offered. To save your people, you must give up everything that you have valued about yourself. Your beauty, your pride, your dreams of a life beyond this village. All of it must be sacrificed willingly and completely." Aiyana felt her heart stop. What do you mean?" "You must take upon yourself the curse you have brought upon your people. You must bear the eternal winter in your own soul, so that they may live in warmth again. You will become the guardian of winter's fury, keeping it contained within yourself so that it can never again threaten the innocent." The wolf stepped closer, and Aiyana could feel the ancient power radiating from him like heat from a fire. "But know this, once you accept this burden, there is no going back. You will live apart from your people, alone in the high mountains where the cold cannot harm others. You will age slowly, living for centuries as the keeper of winter's rage. You will watch generations of Cherokee be born, live, and die while you remain isolated and unchanging. Aiyana's mind reeled. Everything she had ever wanted, beauty, admiration, a life of comfort and luxury, would be gone forever. She would become an exile, a guardian of the very force that had brought so much suffering to her people. But then she thought of little Star that dances, who had been her favorite among the village children. She thought of her blue lips and the way her mother had cried over her still form. She thought of Old Man Willow, who had always been kind to her despite her coldness toward others. She thought of all the people who had loved her and cared for her even when she had given them nothing in return. "If I do this," she said quietly, "if I accept this burden, my people will be safe. The village will be warm again. The unnatural winter will end the moment you accept your new role." The wolf confirmed. "Your people will live and thrive as they did before." Aiyana closed her eyes and felt the last of her pride crumble away like ice in spring sunshine. When she opened them again, her decision was clear. "I accept," she said firmly. "I accept the burden. Save my people." The wolf nodded solemnly. "Then let it be done." He touched her forehead with his massive muzzle, and immediately Aiyana felt the change begin. The cold that had been torturing her people for weeks rushed into her body like a living thing, filling her veins with ice and her lungs with winter wind. She felt her beauty, the one thing she had always believed made her special, drain away like water through her fingers. But along with the cold came something else: understanding, wisdom, connection. For the first time in her life, Aiyana could truly see the world as it was meant to be seen. She could feel the spirits that moved through every tree, every stone, every blade of grass. She could sense the interconnectedness of all living things, the delicate balance that kept the world in harmony. And she could feel her people's pain as if it were her own, which only strengthened her resolve to bear this burden for them. "It is done," the wolf said as the transformation completed. "You are now the winter guardian, keeper of the cold winds and the frozen storms. Your sacrifices save your people, and they will sing songs of your courage for generations to come." Aiyana looked down at her hands, which now appeared normal, but which she could feel were forever changed. The power of eternal winter flowed through her like a river of ice, but it no longer felt threatening. It felt like responsibility. "Will I ever see them again?" she asked. "From a distance," the wolf replied gently. "You will watch over them always, protecting them from natural disasters and spiritual threats. They will sometimes glimpse you in the high mountains during the true winter months, and they will know that their guardian is near." As the wolf spoke, Aiyana could already feel herself being drawn toward the highest peaks, where she would make her new home. But before she left, she had to know that her sacrifice had worked. "Go now," the wolf said, reading her thoughts. "See for yourself that they are safe." Aiyana ran through the forest faster than any mortal should have been able to move, her new spiritual nature carrying her swiftly toward the village. As she drew near, she could already feel the difference in the air. The unnatural cold was gone, replaced by the normal warmth of late autumn. She climbed the tallest tree at the edge of the village and looked down at her people. The ice was melting. Children were emerging from their lodges, their faces bright with wonder as they felt warm air for the first time in weeks. The adults were crying with relief, embracing each other and giving thanks to the spirits for their deliverance. And there, in the center of the village, old Sasa was speaking to the gathered crowd. "The curse has been lifted," the medicine woman announced, her ancient voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Someone among us has made a great sacrifice to save us all. We may never know who it was, but we must honor their courage for all time." Aiyana smiled through her tears, knowing that her people would never have to suffer for her mistakes again. She would spend the rest of her very long life ensuring that the balance between the spiritual and mortal worlds remained intact. As she prepared to leave for the high mountains that would become her eternal home, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see the great wolf spirit approaching. "You have learned the greatest lesson of all," he said with something that might have been pride in his ancient voice. "That true strength comes not from standing above others, but from sacrificing for others. You have found your purpose at last." "Thank you," Aiyana said simply, "for giving me the chance to make this right." The wolf nodded. "Remember, Winter Guardian, You are never truly alone. All the spirits of the Cherokee lands are your family now, and your people, though they may not see you, will always feel your love protecting them. With that, he faded into the shadows between the trees, leaving Aiyana to begin her journey to the high peaks. Years passed. Decades. Then centuries. The village of Canuna grew and prospered, always blessed with favorable weather and protection from natural disasters. The Cherokee people told many stories around their fires, but none was more beloved than the tale of the Winter Guardian. They said that sometimes, during the depths of true winter, hunters and travelers in the high mountains would catch a glimpse of a figure moving among the peaks, a woman of supernatural grace who watched over the Cherokee lands with eternal vigilance. They called her the spirit of sacrifice, and they taught their children that her story proved the most important truth of all. That pride may make us feel powerful, but only love can make us truly strong. And sometimes, when the wind howled through the mountain passes on the coldest nights of winter, the people of Canuna would swear they could hear a voice carried on the storm, the voice of their guardian, singing the ancient songs of protection and love. Aiyana had finally found her purpose, and in losing everything she thought she wanted, she had gained everything she truly needed. The Cherokee people were safe, the balance was maintained, and the Winter Guardian watched over them all, her sacrifice ensuring that pride would never again bring harm to those she loved. This is the way of the spirits. This is the way of the Cherokee. And this is how one woman's journey from pride to sacrifice became a legend that would endure for all time.